coming from or broadcasting from the Metropolitan Museum of Manila now in Bonifacio Global City, and we hope that we could actually have everyone come over as well. The Jisedai Contemporary Arts Platform, or JCAP, is the Japan Foundation Manila's new platform dedicated to the co-development of contemporary art in Japan and in the Philippines. Cultural exchange, particularly between Japan and the Philippines, has been a long-term initiative by the Japan Foundation. Through JCAP, um, the Japan Foundation hopes to expand their knowledge and explore other opportunities for continuous and deeper collaborations. The program JCAP was launched mid last year. The first webinar featured Kyun Chome, composed of Nabuchi-san and Miss Eri Honma. The duo shared some of their works with video installations as their main medium. They are currently here in the Philippines to research on the connection between the ocean and gender identity. The second webinar last October 2022 featured Miss Mayumi Hirano, a colleague and a Japanese artist curator who is currently based in Cubao, Quezon City, Philippines. The third webinar, which I actually attended last November, featured a Japanese artist curator, Ryotaro Fuyuki, and Tra Travel, an art hub based in Osaka. Today, an award-winning Filipino contemporary artist, Leeroy New, who recently completed his artist residency program in Fukuoka Asian Art Museum in Japan, will be our guest speaker. JCAP will continue next month for the colloquium, which will serve as an overview of all JCAP events. We hope that you will continue to join and support the Japan Foundation in this new platform. At this point, please allow me to introduce three JFM officers who are joining us today. JFM's Assistant Director for Arts and Culture, Mr. Wataru Abe, and Program Coordinators, Ms. Skizix Bastilla and Mr. Carlos Ortiz. And to welcome us all, I would like to turn the floor over to Wataru-san.
Hi, thank you very
Wataru-san.
much, Lando-san. Good afternoon, everyone. Konnichiwa, minasan. Welcome to the fourth webinar of JCAP. The Japan Foundation Manila acknowledges the existence of contemporary art exchanges between Japanese and Filipino contemporary artists. Being the only institution dedicated to carrying out Japan's comprehensive international culture exchange programs throughout the world, what we want to achieve through JCAP is to link together what were once isolated individual connections and weave them into a more expansive and all-inclusive exchange. This new project, which we launched last September 2022, aims to foster dialogue, interaction, idea exchange, and collaboration between artists and curators from Japan and the Philippines. For JCAP's fourth webinar, we are honored to have one of the best contemporary Filipino artists, Mr. Leeroy New, who will talk about his experiences in Fukuoka, Japan, through the artist residency program of the Fukuoka Asian Art Museum. We would like to thank all of the artist curators who helped us realize this new platform. I would also like to express my sincerest gratitude to all of our audiences. Thank you for your presence, time, and participation. Please enjoy the webinar.
Thank you, Abe-san, for welcoming our audience. Now, moving on to the main part of our webinar, we are honored to learn to have and learn from Mr. Leeroy New, who has participated in various self-artist residencies, not only in Japan, but in many cities around the world. Leeroy is a multidisciplinary artist whose practice overlaps and intersects with different creative industries: costuming, filmmaking, theater, public installations, product design, and performance. This inclination to move across and among the different modes of creative production has become the spine of his practice, driven by concepts of world building, hybrid myth making, and social change. Using a variety of found objects and recyclables, Leroy creates installations that are in direct conversation with the specific material culture of his work and the sites. Early iterations of his Balete series, for example, made use of discarded industrial pipes weaved together using plastic ties to create a large-scale organic form that resembled the titular tree. He would transform these same materials into performance spaces and wearable sculpture through his collaborations with dancers and theater makers. This eventually led to the creation of a multi-platform collaborative series called Aliens of Manila, which documents alien bodies inhabiting Manila's colorful yet often harsh streets, as well as beyond its shores. Leroy New, in his relatively young career spanning more than a decade, is a recipient of the Ateneo Art Awards in 2008, the Cultural Center of the Philippines 13 Artist Arts Awards in 2012, and the Asian Cultural Council Arts Grant in New York in 2015. Another project of note in 2011 was when he made a sculpted silicone bustier for Lady Gaga that appears in the Marry the Night music video. One of his earliest invitations to exhibit abroad was for the 2008 Singapore Biennale and the 2009 Fukuoka Asian Art Triennial. He has since been invited to present his unique brand of Filipino sci-fi in North America, Australia, Europe, and all over Asia. He has also shown at the Palais de Tokyo, Biennale of Sydney, Honolulu Triennale, Somerset House, and was selected to build an installation of Burning Man 2020. In the fourth Fukuoka Asian Art Triennale, 2009, Leroy created an enormous sculpture at the museum entrance. In this residency program, his two large-scale installation works were made from PET bottles and were exhibited at the FAAM and the historic Myoraku-ji Temple. Last year, he spent 3 months in Fukuoka from July to October for a second artist in residence program organized by the museum. So, ladies and gentlemen, everyone, let us all welcome Leroy New. Hi, Leroy.
Hello, Randall. Thank you very much. Konnichiwa, minasan. I'm very happy to be sharing the space the afternoon with you. Okay. So I guess let's present the start of my presentation. I will be presenting a kind of introduction to my work for the first half of my presentation. And then for the second part, I will be sharing my experiences during the almost 3-month residency stay that I did in Fukuoka. Yeah, okay. So how do we, where can I see the images? Sorry. There you go. All right, let's start. All right. There you go. Hello again. My name is Leeroy. I am a Philippine-based creative artist, designer, and I am originally from the south of the Philippines. And the very first part of my presentation will talk about my background, just to, for us to like get to know each other. The first image you're seeing, which we will see again later on, is one of my large-scale works, site-specific installation projects. I like to use this title for my talk, Outer Space Filipino Worker, which I borrowed from my filmmaker friend Keith Sikat's graphic novel with the same name. Yeah. Next image, please. So yeah, just a little icebreaker. This is a photo of my family in General Santos City. We're like a Chinese Filipino family in Mindanao. Guess where I am? Clue, I'm the one with the demon on top of his head and the really big teethy smile. Next slide, please. So in General Santos, when I was growing up there from until I was 12, before I moved to Luzon to Laguna to study art, I had no access to, there was no internet, so I had no access to, art sources. Our library was limited in its collection of art books. There were very few, if not none at all. So I had to be creative in seeking out my sources for creativity, for artistic examples. No, so I looked towards sci-fi films, animation, horror. As you can see, this is just a sampling of the things that I was able to see and experience and watch in General Santos City. On the upper left image is a still from Hayao Miyazaki's Noshika Valley of the Wind. So this is where, I didn't know it back then, but all these references would determine how my sensibility for form, my inclination towards the fantastic, the supernatural, or the futuristic as well. The top right image is still from Shake, Rattle, and Roll, a well-loved horror franchise in the Philippines. There's the image below it is a clip from this 90s film called The Shadow. And then on the bottom of that image is a still from Fifth Element. My father was able to get like a tape of Fifth Element directed by Luc Besson. When we were growing up, I would repeatedly watch this film, and I was really drawn to the worlds that they built, no, and the costumes, just like the crazy, the amount of crazy in one film. I just really enjoyed that. And the bottom left image is still from Fern Gully, an animated film about this human who was shrunk into the size and got to interact with fairies, and they had to battle the threat of their forest home being destroyed. So yeah. Next slide, please. On top of like enjoying all those other things, no, like sci-fi films, games, horror, I saw like a few paintings in our local malls that were paintings of like localized still lifes, farm lands, fishermen toiling in the, so that's what I knew what art was at that time. I would join poster making contests, no, for Nutrition Month. So those were our equivalents of art fairs at that time in General Santos City. I feel bad that I also saw special effect shows growing up, where they showed how they built sets for these fantastic movies, fantasy movies, scale models, costumes, prosthetics. I didn't know it at that time, but that would determine how I would apply my arts training to my current practice. Next slide, please. Yeah. So I was lucky enough to learn about this art school in Laguna called Philippine High School for the Arts. I mean, my parents heard about it from a neighbor, and then they knew some friends' kids who passed the year before, and they knew about my inclination for the arts, and they passed on the information of how to apply for this art school. And I took the talent or the test, you know, the talent test, and was lucky enough to get in. It was such a big deal for me because like even at an early age, I knew that this was something I really wanted to pursue. So these are just like a few images of me during that school. I'm the one with the green face, if you're not sure, on the left. And on the right is me showing my mask project for our mask making class. So yeah, I guess this is how one of the first few instances where we learned how to apply our visual arts training to accommodate the human body by making masks. Next slide, please. Yes. So in college, so this image is of me and my good friend at that time in college. So after graduating from Philippine High School for the Arts, we were very impatient with studying in college. Now we wanted to already show works. We felt like, you know, we were feeling confident that we kind of like know enough that we wanted to show our works already, exhibit in galleries. So we would present proposals to galleries. But of course, you know, understandably, they would turn us down because we were young, we were students, and we had a very small body of work to speak of. So yeah, so that didn't stop us. We easily realized that, you know, the entire city is a space where we can present our works. So me and my friend here decided to paint, do graffiti or your street art in UP, Diliman, where I studied fine arts. But also eventually we strayed into the bigger streets of EDSA. So this is actually along EDSA. We dressed up in fake MMDA uniforms. This was the color of the MMDA uniforms then. We silk screened student volunteers at the back to make it seem legit. And we would wake up early in the morning with pre-mixed paints, go out into the street. So this is somewhere, this wall is actually somewhere between Ortigas Avenue and Santolan. So just like this is the wall that is the perimeter of the military base there. Yes. Next slide, please. But even then, I knew I wanted to build big works. So this is an image of my thesis for UP Fine Arts. I somehow kind of transitioned from painting on walls to actually creating forms that intervene in public spaces. So this work is actually originally the structure underneath this is a waiting shed designed by national artist Napoleon Abueva. I was lucky enough to get his permission to kind of intervene on his structure. These waiting sheds that look like folded paper airplanes greet you as you enter UP Diliman. And so yeah, it's like very symmetrical, one on both sides. So on one side, I covered it with spandex and inserted giant bean bags underneath to disrupt the very original geometric, angular, linear flat form into something more organic, which I felt, these like organic shapes speak to my sensibility for form more. It reminds me of alien creatures or alien planets and fantastic creatures and forms, Yes. Next slide, please. So these are just examples of the large-scale works in public spaces that I've done. So in 2009, I was invited by the Fukuoka Asian Art Museum to participate in the 2009 Fukuoka Triennial. And this is the work that I made for that show. This was the first time I've ever been to Japan, and it was in Fukuoka. So this piece is a spaceship. In my mind, it's a spaceship inspired by the religious iconography that we see here in the Philippines of God, representations of God as a singular eye, as an all-seeing eye. And the spaceship is embellished with the adornments that you would see on our religious icons, the pokpok, these sheets that are hammered to create these ornate details. Yeah. Next slide, please. So this is another iteration of the spaceship, but using bamboo. So in my mind, like, since I could, back then in 2012, I couldn't replicate the kind of sleek, futuristic forms that first world countries were doing, I decided to make use of the materials that were available to me. So in this case, bamboo. Next slide, please. So this is another image. Sorry, it kind of like skipped, but this is another image of the spaceship from the Fukuoka Triennial show in 2009. That's where it was situated. And I know that in Japanese culture, there's a love for like giant monsters and spaceships and robots. And the locals were calling it different names that resonated with them, from characters that they knew from local animation and manga. Next slide, please. So that's me, that's baby me back in 2009. I was so excited to actually see my spaceship being lifted by a crane as we were installing it. I was very inexperienced. Good thing the team was very helpful. Like they made sure that my work was secure and durable. And they gave me like a really easy time with the installation, because this was my first time doing my second time installing outside of the country on a kind of large scale. So yeah, I was like pretty nervous during my first few years doing this kind of work, because I've been just learning it as I go, winging it, and had to like learn and adapt really fast. Next slide, please. So as was mentioned earlier by Randa in his like long introduction, that I also collaborate with performers, theater makers, dancers, movers since art high school. I studied with theater majors, dancers, musicians, creative writers in that school. I was a visual arts major myself, and the visual arts majors would often build the sets, help build the sets, design the sets, the costumes, props of our performance-based batchmates, you know, and and uh, and this is just a continuation of that kind of holistic way of thinking about a creative practice. I never lost that part of me, that interest to collaborate and to apply my visual arts training to accommodate the human body, to think about movement, to think about how one moves through space. So these are just examples of many experiments that I did with different forms and different materials in relation to the human body. Next slide, please. So I would always, if I was fascinated by a specific idea or a specific technique, I would apply it on different contexts and forms. So this is just one example where I would be fascinated by a specific, sculpting technique, and I would create a sculptural piece out of it, or maybe a face mask, and evolve that into a silicone dress. Next slide, please. So these experiments with wearable pieces, with wearable sculpture and performance, led to an experimental series which me and my friends came up with over drinks. No, it was just the result of us teasing each other and joking and talking about like that recent trend of Humans of New York, and how everyone's like doing their own version of Humans of New York. And we joke that, yeah, if we do that here, like we're not humans here, we're aliens. And that led to Aliens of Manila. The Aliens of Manila, I guess, speaks about our we were like young creatives at that time, relatively young, and we had all this content about practicing in the Philippines and how living in the Philippines can be very brutal to its citizens, and how we're displaced by our own, with infrastructure or lack thereof, and how our government is really lacking in so many aspects of our lives in the city and everywhere else. So this is just a few of the images of these displaced bodies, like trying to interact with their surroundings with the best they can. Next slide, please. So yeah, it's become a full-on, continuous, ongoing series that I still do every chance I get. So these are just other images that we've taken in different parts of the city. Next slide, please. When I was studying in art high school and in college, one of my professors always mentioned Divisoria. I'm from the South, General Santos City. So when I discovered this, it was amazing. I was obsessed with the place. Whenever we'd have weekend breaks from boarding school in art high school, I would go to Divisoria to explore. And this is where you really get a sense of the pulse and the desire of the people. Like whatever's trending, you will see it here. Like Angry Birds, or like Pokemon or whatever. You will everyone will be selling those. But you can also get like illegal animals, like anything under the sun. Wedding souvenirs, random toys, Halloween costumes, all sorts of fabric. I consciously went here for my art materials as opposed to like the traditional art material stores. I wanted to use familiar objects. I wanted to use what people would be able to relate to. Next slide, please. So they would also be selling, all sorts of different divinities in different costumes covered in plastic, and toys they would sell by the kilo. So these were like materials that really kind of intrigued me. So I would like, for the toys, for example, since they sold them by the kilo for really cheap, it was good for like a student artist with no big budget to work with. So this was a great place to experiment on different materials. Next slide, please. I also acknowledge how I'm influenced by how basically we don't throw things away here. Single-use plastic ends up becoming Christmas decor or any sort of like embellishment for the home. And I'm very fascinated by the craft involved and the ingenuity of transforming these common objects into these ornate, pretty things. The image in the middle is a security guard in Intramuros who picks up like random stuff that he finds on the ground and attaches them to his bike. So we have this flair for embellishing and color and abundance, celebrating abundance and color. And I was very influenced by that sensibility starting out. And this would show in, next slide, please. Yes, so these are more examples of the things that I really like. Like if I would see these on the side of the road, these Christmas trees made out of agricultural surplus, wastes, and all sorts of other trash materials. I feel the need to like take photos of them, and I have like a whole album full of these images. Next slide, please. So these are just examples of the costumes that I was able to make using all the many different things that I would find in Divisoria. On the left is made out of toy parts, like the toys that they sell by the kilo. And on the right are is just like funny to me because all the objects are recognizable. The food covers, strainers, funnels, pipes. So yeah, but I like, not taking the work too seriously, and I like that when people see it like and they recognize the objects and and laugh or whatever. It's I like that as a response. Next, please. And so these are more examples of the toy parts, toys by the kilo transformed into sci-fi looking armor. And on the right is another alien character that we did using domestic objects like scrubs, scrubbing sponges, and more of the strainers and food covers and containers. Next slide, please. So just more examples of that as well. Next slide, please. So more and more, I tried to challenge myself to, seek out cheaper. I mean, cheap materials or like whatever's available. So in this case, back in 2009, I got into a residency in somewhere in Australia, in Bendigo, in the south, and they have all these like recycling centers. They didn't have a budget for me to work with, so we went to these centers because you can buy stuff for like really cheap, like a pile of these for like a few dollars, and inspired, and which I did, and it inspired me to create this work that resembles the balete tree. Next slide, please. This chance encounter with a pile of flexible hoses led to a series of works that I call balete, because in principle, I'm weaving around existing structures using these flexible pipes. And the balete is a kind of vampiric plant where it starts out as a vine that wraps around a tree and eventually consumes the tree and becomes the tree, this like very imposing natural structure. That's why it's a mystical tree, a sacred tree in Southeast Asia. Next slide, please. So those same materials, like the parts for that installation, I would recycle to make costumes. Next slide, please. And I tend to not stick to just like one idea and try to expand the use of these materials in different ways. Next slide, please. So these are just examples of like when I would go to different recycling centers in different countries. You'll always see something culturally different that's grounded in the culture of that particular place. So these are knitting needles. I didn't know it when I first saw it, but like someone explained to me that they're knitting needles. Next image, please. And I saw like a lot of these like small toy parts, which I'm sort of familiar with, but these are all random. So this is like a recycling center in France. Next slide, please. So I got both the knitting needles and the toy bits and experimented with them. So I've become, I guess, part of the work now is like becoming good at problem solving on the spot. Like how do I put these things together to create something? Next slide, please. So it led to this like knitting needle toy armor sculpture. So it's just an example of how I would approach using random materials. Next slide, please. So another example of what I would find, like salad strainers, which I don't find here in the Philippines. Some are like just strainers, but some are like those spinning salad strainers that is, I thought was very first world. Kidding. But yeah. Next slide, please. So I got like this pile and transformed them into space helmets for that same show with the knitting needles and the toys. Next slide, please. Just some of the shoots that we did during that time that I was there. Next slide, please. So part of the work is I get invited to do workshops as well for like all sorts of different groups, from like people from a senior's home to children. In this case, these are science teachers who wanted to learn how to demonstrate making prototypes using available materials, stuff that they can just like, they don't need to buy. So that's them. Next slide, please. So this group are art teachers from all over the Philippines. Same kind of workshop, but in this case, using these random materials to make wearable pieces. Next slide, please. And these are kids, a class in Taiwan. We made puppets out of fabric. Next slide, please. And this is in PUP. They collect their plastic bottles in the campus. And one of their mentors invited me to demonstrate and teach them how to like manipulate these materials. And we made a river dragon made out of trash. Next slide, please. So, and we hung it up in the campus. Next slide, please. And so, I mean, we'll just go through this real quickly. These are just examples of how the large scale projects have evolved. This is a floating at how we try to combine different aspects of our work, like the performance bit, urban concerns, like how do we address urban issues, and the interactive sculptural practice of making large-scale installations. This is a floating island that we did for a river for a project dedicated to raising awareness for the Pasig River. Next slide, please. Yeah, this is the original image that you saw. That's me on the leftmost, that brown dot for scale. It's a weaved bamboo structure over water for a festival in Thailand. Next slide, please. And okay, we're nearing, we're getting close to the latest series that I've been doing. So of course, we're all aware of what happened in 2020, and people were sending me images of like this because it reminded them of how I use found objects to create like space sci-fi looking helmets. But this is like a reality that we saw at that the first month of the pandemic, where people did not have access to face shields and masks because there was a lack of supply. So they basically just cut up these gallon-sized water bottles and put them over their heads. Next slide, please. At that time, many artist studios and designers were converted their studio practice to create improvised face shields and PPEs. We also participated in that effort. So this is my team with improvised face shields that we would deliver to the neighboring clinics in our community, in our city. But it also inspired us to come up with these alien face shields, statement face shields. Next slide, please. So I got stuck in during the pandemic in my studio with a lot of collected plastic bottles, which was meant for a large-scale installation art project. So I had like enough to come up with like an entire series of statement sculptural face shields that kind of was immediate to our concerns at that time. Next slide, please. So we'll just go through this real quickly so we can move to the residency part. So this is just to show the progression of how I used the material and how it's evolved. Next slide, please. I did like online workshops for kids because like a lot of kids couldn't go to school, so I was invited to do online workshops as well to bedazzle or like their face shields, their improvised face shields, or come up with their own alien statement sculptural art face shields. Next slide, please. Yeah, so there's a Princess Mononoke inspired plastic bottle face shield. Next slide, please. So with every mask that I do, I try to find a different way to use the plastic bottles to push the concept further in terms of form and technique. Next slide, please. And we actually got to use the face shields for actual protests and not just like online protests. Next slide, please. And again, the way I work from a small idea and try to apply it on a larger scale. So this is like our first attempt at like creating bigger forms using the bottles. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah, we'll just like go through this just to show you the variations. Next slide, please. From masks to full body suits. Next slide. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just just to show you how it's evolved since 2020. Next slide, please. Next, please. Next, please. So from masks, from wearables to actual sculptural pieces in public spaces, to more complex combinations of plastic bottles, like different size plastic bottles. Next slide, please. So this is an evolved version of the Balete series. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the bottles I used here as embellishments, and these are like collected plastic surplus from the local recycling centers used as embellishments for the large scale installations. Next slide, please. Yeah, so more variations of that idea. Next slide, please. So these are recent large-scale interactive spaces that we built. This one is in Ateneo, currently in Ateneo right now. Next slide, please. So yeah, that one I worked with a farmer, an environmental agriculturalist, and he helped me grow food plants in the installation. Next slide, please. So this is what it looked like during its peak growth. Now I think we need to, there's nothing left, but we need to replant. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So this is more of how the large scale projects have evolved as well. So this is a project that we did in La Union, originally for Burning Man, but because of the pandemic, they allowed us to build it here, which was even better. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. Yeah. So just to show you examples of the large scale pieces as well. And now we're the last part. Just a quick run through of my experience during my 2.5-month, almost 3-month residency in Fukuoka. It felt like a reunion because the last time I was there was in 2009 for the Fukuoka Asian Art Triennial. And I was very happy to hear from them. And they invited me to be one of the artists that they will host for their program. So this is, I think this is like my second day I took this photo. Just a kind of like a nostalgic photo. Next slide. That's where the spaceship was hung, where that yellow tarp was. This is Tomo-san, the curator who took care of me. On the second day, we went to visit the Myorakuji Temple, the site for my show at the end of the residency. So for the period that I would be staying, I would be making a piece that we will install here. Next slide, please. So it was great to actually be in the temple. Before we were just like doing Zoom calls, Zoom tours. They were showing me the temple, but of course it feels very different when you're actually there. And the weather was summer, so it was hot. That's hence the umbrellas. I was sweaty all the time during that period. This was like a rough sketch that I did. I would take a photo of the place, the site, and kind of like do like a rough sketch, mostly for all the people I'm working with, so they can understand what I intend to do. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just more samples of how we would like come up with ideas with how to like install the work. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just proposals for like how I plan to do something. They're not necessarily what we did in the end, but yeah, this is how it would start. Next slide, please. I was doing the residency with another artist, so we were in the studio together. This is Lee Byung-chan, my neighbor, who is an artist based in Seoul, Korea. So this is the first time we went out to get food. So we were together for like almost every day for almost 3 months. So you can imagine how close we got at the end of that residency. Next slide, please. Just to show you, this is what Lee Byung-chan does. Really impressive, large-scale inflatable sculptures. So yeah, I really enjoyed seeing him work in the same space as me during that period. Next, please. So I started my first week in Japan collecting bottles from the streets. It's like, as you may know, the waste collection system there is quite efficient, and people are very they practice like segregation very seriously. So I was like very happy to see all these like already cleaned and segregated plastic bottles. And my first impulse was, being Filipino, like to grab them from the streets. But then one of the curators told me like, no, don't. We can collect. We can do like a volunteer thing and have people bring in bottles instead of you looking like you're stealing plastic bags, plastic bottles from the streets. But I managed to steal a few just between us. So that's me. Byung-chan took my photo. He was my accomplice. He said like, oh, I have there are many plastic bags in my apartment too, outside of the apartment where the people set them aside for the garbage truck to pick them up. So yeah, this is proof that we were like stealing plastic bottles from the streets. Next slide, please. So yeah, but some of them weren't like exactly super clean. So I had to clean them, wash them. Some had cigarette butts in them. So in the end, we did like a collection system where volunteers would already pre-clean the bottles. But during my first few days, this is what I was able to like. This was what I was doing, being, you know, Filipino. Next. They had us do a few different interactive activities with locals, with the museum staff, with local schools, with museum regulars. Byung-chan and I did talks about our work as well, you know, as an introduction at the very beginning of the residency. That's Midori-san, who is assigned to like make our lives easier. She was my interpreter for that talk, but she was with us the entire time during our stay there as well. Next slide, please. Of course, they took us around, you know, showed us all different artist residency programs as well, introduced us to other artists, made sure that we got to see the different rural areas of Fukuoka as well. Next slide, please. And we met with an artist couple, but only the wife, and one of them was there, and they were also collecting plastic bottles for a project, and they were very nice enough to give me three large bags full of plastic bottles. Like I think I'm the only one who gets really excited seeing plastic bottles in large bags. Yeah, so that was that's what I got home from that trip. Next slide, please. And of course, I whenever I go visit a different country, I always make it a point to visit their hardware stores. These are the places I end up going to: recycling centers and hardware supply stores, and not the touristy destinations. So that's Miki-san. So that is Miki-san. She is a volunteer and kind of like a regular in the art scene of Fukuoka. And her and Hatsune-san, both of them are like very active in the art scene, and they volunteer to take out artists. And so this is like our little selfie in one of the big hardware stores in Fukuoka. Next slide, please. So soon enough, my studio was getting filled with plastic bottles from all the people that were donating. And so I could like go crazy with the forums that I wanted to experiment on that I couldn't because of the limited supply of plastic bottles. Next slide, please. So yeah, these are just like behind the scene photos of the museum staff of AGB, of the Fukuoka Asian Art Museum. Yeah, I'll just show you like, what I've been up to during that stay. So this is me pretending to work for a photo shoot. Next slide, please. So I started with like small experiments of prototype forms. Next slide, please. Yeah, so sometimes I get bored and find out different ways to wear them. Next slide, please. Yeah, so a lot of like this going on in the studio. Next slide, please. Yeah. So bit by bit, the pieces were getting formed. So I was going to do an installation for the temple, but also a series of wearable pieces that we plan to shoot for our Aliens of Fukuoka series. Next slide, please. So that's Byung-chan and me having Korean instant noodles in between work. Next slide, please. Of course, there was a lot of food involved. We were both foreign to this land and we wanted to try everything. So every night we had to go to a different place to eat, try everything that Fukuoka had to offer. On the right, image on the right, I took Byung-chan to a Filipino restaurant there. Apparently there are a lot of like Filipino restaurants in the entertainment district because of the Filipino bar owners and entertainers. Next slide, please. There was also a lot of singing that took place. They love their karaoke, and Byung-chan too, especially being Korean, also loves karaoke. That other guy is a new resident artist, came in like maybe a month and a half later. He's Jason from Taiwan. Next slide, please. Again, more singing. That's Midori, our like project coordinator who took us around at night. Next slide, please. So this is just a glimpse of non-art stuff, So dancing in the streets. I think this is very important because like we're doing work all day in the studio. So at night we get to explore. And, we're surprised and happy to see that the nightlife is quite vibrant. Next slide, please. So this is the day when we decided to shoot the wearable pieces, all the wearable pieces that we did for our Aliens of Fukuoka series. So we had an entire team join us, 2 performers, and our photographer, Itoku-san, Kenji-san, as well, who assisted me in my last 2 weeks making work in the studio. And Tomo-san, of course, our curator. Next slide, please. So this was fun seeing our local team doing guerrilla shoots, like if we saw a police car, we'd like stop and pretend like we weren't doing anything. So yeah, it was fun seeing them behave not in their usual way. So we went to like the entertainment district, different alleys to shoot. So these are just behind the scenes of how we shot the images that I'll show you at the end. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is one of the final images that we did. So this, I call this image Goddess of Malnutrition, because I guess it's a takeoff on the multi-breasted goddesses of from the different mythologies. But in this case, the breasts that supply nutrition and milk are replaced by the plastic bottles. So instead of being nourished, you're being malnourished. So the goddess of malnourishment or malnutrition. Next slide, please. So this is Mushroom Man and Monkey Man walking the streets, the different streets. Next slide, please. So this this one reminds us of like a temple structure of sorts. Next slide, please. So this is the final piece from the previous photo that I showed you. And there's the goddess of malnutrition again on the left, and on the right is the goddess of good service, because of the echo of bottles around her, as if she's pouring everyone a drink, making sure everyone's cup is full. Next slide, please. So yeah, more shoots that we did in different locations. We were scouting for locations the day before, like a few days before, and we found this like rooftop through someone they know, like was residing in that building. So this is the photo that we took up there. Next, please. So at the end of the shoot, and when all the pieces were done, we moved into Murakuji Temple. And this is how we situated the aliens, the alien costumes on mannequins, and the balete tree, the ghost balete tree using made out of the bottles growing on the sides of the temple. Next slide, please. But it was quite dramatic at night with the lights on. So it was really meant for locals after work to experience the piece at night with the lights. It was also kind of like, it coincided with the light festival. So we were able to work with the lighting designer to light up the temple and the entities that appeared in front of the temple. Next slide, please. So at the gate, on the left image are the pieces that we installed at the gate of the temple as you enter. And yeah, just a detailed shot of one of the aliens. Next slide, please. So after we installed the pieces in the temple, it was only up there for like a week. And then we moved all the pieces and reinstalled them inside the museum, the Fukuoka Asian Art Museum. So this is how we installed it inside the museum. Next slide, please. So you can imagine the amount, the quantity of bottles that we were able to collect. So in this photo is Byung-chan's work over there at the back, the black alien, inflated alien tentacled creature. And then my work here, the ghostly white figures. Next slide, please. And we're nearing the end. So this is our like goodbye photo. Yeah, Byung-chan always makes that face for photos. I don't know why. Maybe it's a Korean thing. There's Rina-san. Rina-san in the kind of magenta top was my curator back in 2009 for the Fuqua training. So we haven't seen each other in more than a decade, and it felt like, you know, like a real reunion. It's just seeing her again after like that very kind of key moment in my life where I was first installing a piece outside of the country. Yeah. Next slide, please. And I love how it's customary that they take you to the airport themselves just before your flight. And, you know, they even brought like snacks for us to munch on while waiting for the flight. So this is our last airport selfie before I like took off. Next slide, please. Yeah, so that's pretty much like what that experience was during that period. I mean, that's all that I could fit for now, but there was a lot. You know, there was a lot of singing, a lot of eating, a lot of walking around, a lot of bottles. But yeah, I can share more during our Q&A if anybody's interested to know any specific details about what I just showed you. So thank you.
Hi, Leroy.
Hello, Randall.
Yes, thank you very much for that ample presentation. So very thorough. Of course, from childhood to, you know, the
Oh, my.
literally leaving at the airport. So very hospitable, our colleagues from the Fukuoka Asian Art Museum. So before I was asked by the Japan Foundation to give short comments, but before that, K6 was telling me that for those who are on Zoom right now, if you have a specific question to Leroy, you can actually ask the Japan Foundation staff to let you come in as a panelist. So Sky, how do we do that? They send you a message or they post on the Q&A.
Hi, Randall. I can just
Yes.
promote all of them as
Okay.
panelists, and it's up to them if they want to accept the invitation or not.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yes. Yeah. So that our attendees won't be surprised that they're promoted as panelists. But going back to, thanks, Sky. But going back to Leroy, I think I also have created like my own organic thing here. Oh, okay. It's blurred. All of my anyway, I'll just share later with you and the Japan Foundation, like all of my notes and all of the squiggles, because essentially what we see are, I mean, you as an explorer and, you know, as a collector of things aside from garbage, we transform these things into things that are, of course, coming from your imagination, from other people's imagination. And we are glad that you are able to share this again back with our to the immediate community of the Fukuoka Asian Art Museum, which was your last stint. But of course, I also, or we were also aware of, you know, all of your sculptural or architectural even works that you did at several museums, institutions, and you flow through the forms. So your works are, you know, starting from the two-dimensional plane, some very sculptural, wearable, architectural, but of course yung siguro at the top of my head yung concern ko rin is how do you conserve all those plastic, which is actually the bedrock of your medium. It is your medium. As you do stage design. I have been wanting to ask you that, Leroy. How do you conserve? How do you actually also dispose? Maybe, or in siguro in museum parlance we call it dispossession. We have ways of putting the or the when we deaccession an artwork, we have proper ways of releasing it from the system. So how do you think would be this be for your a quick question lang siguro sa'yo, Leroy.
Hmm. Yes, so that was kind of what drove me to like challenge myself to strictly use these already available waste products. Because I knew that I was doing large scale works. Nung simula, I was fascinated by doing environments and kind of transforming my immediate spaces through large scale sculptural interventions. So that was always an issue that would recur, no? Like how what the life cycle of the material. So before we would, before kasi like my main concern as a young artist was to make work muna, di ba? So these other concerns kind of like followed as the practice kind of expanded and deepened. There was a period where we just wanted we wanted to like access cheap materials. No, that's why Divisoria like you could like access materials in large quantities for like a price that was good for a new recently graduate artist, no, like a young artist or whatever. So wala namang nagfa-fund dito ng mga large scale projects when I was starting out.
Yeah.
The language of installation art was not developed as much yet. I don't know if it is, pero in the advertising commercial events world, yung language of installation art has been kind of cultivated to a point of saturation minsan, no? Pero doon medyo buhay kasi they have the resources to commission large scale projects. Pero yun nga, so before, like we would just purchase new materials to create like these large scale pieces, and sometimes they would be collected by the whoever commissioned the piece, or they would go to me. I would be happy to receive kasi nga I suddenly have all these materials that I can recycle to make costumes, to make other installation projects. So that's why a concern of mine then was like space, really, to like because being a creative and you're used to like not having enough resources, you hoard you hoard materials. And then of course the question again, like we would always problematize nga the disposal, or like where would the surplus materials would go kung hindi sila, if they don't end up becoming permanent works, no? And the conversation would always come up. Hence, this led me to like strictly sourcing my materials from recycling centers, or just collecting talagang products that are already available, or like waste materials. Like bottles is the most ubiquitous in the Philippines, so it's almost infinite in quantity here. Hindi ka mauubusan. And so with these and the convenient thing about these projects that make use of plastic bottles is you can return them to the recycling centers. So I parang solved na yung cycle ng work, no? Kasi like they can still reuse, recycle it after, if these aren't permanent pieces. Like by permanent pieces, I mean like the wearables that we keep, no? We continue shipping.
Or those which are kept by the museums or galleries, and also for your patrons.
Yeah,
if
the
they
big
have the
ones.
space.
Yeah, Yeah.
So yeah, thanks, Leroy. I'm just opening up since I can't ask you enough and we only have enough time. Before we go to panelist who's on screen, there's just one question here I would like you to respond. Um, do you have any message and life hack or advice for burnout or being lost as an artist? So, this
Ah,
comes from time to time sa mga ano talaga, sa mga
burnt out.
conversations.
Uh,
You were saying,
mm,
'di ba may times na bored ka rin, so you actually use that bored, yung
yeah.
energy of that boredom, if that's ano,
Uh-huh.
oxymoron ba yun? Pero there is
Uh,
moments of boredom, burnout. How do you deal with that, Leroy?
mm, um, well, actually, I'm a very I'm a celebratory guy. No, I like to. Kumaga like I work hard, but I also know how to have fun.
Mhm.
I guess. No, I make sure that I get to hang out with friends. We go out like I showed in the residency period.
Mhm.
Kami, Byung-chan, the two of us, at the end of the night, we'd like go discover like something nice to eat, and then we'd sometimes do karaoke. I've never done so much karaoke during that 2.5 month period because of him than I
Mhm.
have in the past 5 years of my life. So I guess it's cultural din. Sikrik-sikrik kwento niya nga. It's like life is hard daw in Seoul. Talagang sila
Mhm.
they keep talking about getting burnt out. It's very competitive, the scene. So I mean in general like work I guess. So they have like
Mhm.
these karaoke booths, no? Fit for one person or two or whatever, where people like just like sing their hearts out, sing their stress out.
Mhm.
Ganon. But yeah, you have to I guess understand or remember that your work is I guess fueled by your experiences as a
Mhm.
person living in this world, and it's not isolated. I guess that's parang naging cure all for me yung working with other people, collaborating with other people.
Mhm.
It
Mhm.
saves me from being burnt out and just like dwelling in my own mind, because I'm constantly hearing new ideas, learning new stuff from people, new specialists.
Mhm.
I'm always out traveling because I've chosen to do work outside of a studio, of the confines of a
Mhm.
studio. So I guess that's why I'm still I have enough energy to keep doing the work that I do kasi nga I enjoy learning about new places, new cities, meeting new people, eating new food, new learning about yun, ganon. So
Yeah.
parang vacation and work na siya. Ganon.
Yeah. Usually that's how residencies are made, cultural exchange programs. Yung socializing part or interaction with new peers really enhances your observation o-
Yeah.
towards or for actually collaborating among each other or returning back to your host home country coming from the host na nakakatawa talaga literally hinatid ka talaga sa eroplano. Um
Oo.
Uh, that's
Yeah.
very that's very endearing for the museum to do. But anyway,
Yeah.
sorry. I'm just doing time check, Leroy. No, I think one of our attendees want to speak directly. So can I call on Faustito Aure? Hi,
Hi.
if you can unmute yourself.
Hello, Leroy. Hi.
Hello, Faustito.
You can call me Tito. Good
Tito.
afternoon to JFM, to Randall, the rest of the participants in this Zoom webinar. I've been wanting to really be a part of this series of webinars of Japan Foundation. Leroy, I would like to ask you, what are your plans for November? Kasi alam mo, we will be commemorating the 10th anniversary of Yolanda. As you may have known, maybe you were like, how old were you then in 2013? Baka baby ka pa nun. So, alam mo naman, may nangyari dito sa Tacloban City, right? So we are really,
Yes,
we have
yes.
a lot of plans in the pipeline already. Like, we wanted to, meron kaming gusto namin gawing coffee table book, yung mga nangyari sa Yolanda, etc., etc. And since I am a witness of what you've done in Fukuoka and what you worked with sa yung collab mo with Japan Foundation, I was wondering if you would want to bring this to Tacloban City to commemorate the 10th anniversary of Yolanda. So I'm asking, first of all, ano yung plans mo? Ano yung, what you want to do?
I mean,
for
I'm definitely open to it. Yeah, we can definitely talk about this. Siguro, like we can share details
Yes,
after, and
please.
then go into
How do we do that?
details.
Can I give you my email number? Can I call you or what? So we can discuss this.
Paano
I
I
will
nga
be in
think
ba?
we
Manila next
can,
month, so maybe we can meet each
yeah,
other somewhere in Manila.
yeah, Tito, we can connect privately after
Yes,
siguro through
please.
email and through the Japan Foundation Manila
Yeah.
office.
Okay.
Okay.
Sige po.
Thank
Thank you very much.
Problem.
Moderator
Salamat.
Randall. Leeroy, God bless. Keep up
Thank
the good
you.
work. May the Lord
Salamat.
bless your hands and your mind and your whatever. Thank you, thank you. Maraming salamat.
Salamat po.
Okay, thank you, Tito. I think
Thank
we
you.
also have, thanks, Tito. We might have some audience also from Japan. So if there are any questions coming from that side, from one hour away, Japan Foundation colleagues, do we have questions coming from Japan? Otherwise, we could actually, Sky, I can ask another, maybe a last question coming from the attendees. So let me just.
Hi, Randall.
Yep.
I think people are just warming up, so we can accommodate
Sure.
more
Sige.
questions.
Okay,
Thank you.
another anonymous attendee. Would be nice if we know your name. Do you have advice on how to expand networks in art? Like reaching out in such new places and getting to places starting from being a student. I would assume that our the one who questions is a college student or high school student. Yun. I think you already nag-biography ka na kanina, Leroy, but perhaps a tip to our audience who are studying particularly art.
Right. Sorry, could you repeat the question? Medyo naputo lang. The exact question.
The exact question is how to expand network
I see.
through your art, like reaching out to
like
new places and getting into places.
Okay.
So international networking, I assume.
National networking ba to? International networking?
Mukhang both. National,
Both,
international.
okay. Ako naman, I was, syempre when you're starting out as a student artist or like fresh grad, medyo masipag kami pumunta ng mga shows, see what's being done, but also balance that with focusing on building on a body of work. No, ako, I was, I guess, persistent, medyo matigas ulo ko, stubborn ako in insisting to do something that's really hard and impractical and financially unsure, no? Like large scale public arts, installation art, like pero somehow, like, kaya nga I had to hustle. I did all sorts of jobs. I did production design for film, for TV, gagawa ng mga trophies, mga trophy racket, yan, uso yan dati. Tapos mga sets, taga-execute ng mga design ng iba. Yan, parang third world creative hustle talaga is doing all sorts of stuff, no? Pero I realized strategy din yung having multiple sources of income, I guess, to use no. Parang eventually I realized na I didn't want to be beholden to the commercial gallery system.
Yeah.
Kasi that would keep me from experimenting with my performance artist collaborators, from building works in the streets or in public spaces. I'd just be doing a specific kind of work. But also the commercial gallery scene had the opinion na medyo magulo rin yung ginagawa ko. It's, I guess, too all over the place to be marketable. No, I can't, why can't, I've heard this said to me once or twice, like, why can't you just stick one thing? Kasi nahirapan sila i-market. Hindi na mahirap i-control yung value. So yun, yung mga ganong lengguwahe. So yun, so I did, so yun, like I had to hustle extra, like, so I could like earn from this.
But then the art that you do is actually inherent because to the plurality of yung kulang na nga lang yata tutulakan na lang, Leeroy eh. Di ka pa namin hindi ka pa namin narinig tumula, no?
Nagkakataon pa naman.
So yeah, I think ayun nga, yung scale of what you do is very, it's like yung plastic as a medium, it's very multifarious, and you do little things, you do wide things, big things, people can use them. They stand solid on spaces, float on water. So I think as maybe space institutions or commercial spaces would look at you, that will be their concern, that it is really not, it's really hard to pinpoint you kasi nga kailangan mo ng kailangan mo ng mono identity, poly yung identity ng creation. But yeah, just also looking again, thanks Leeroy, I think we have ayun, eto napaka na question, why are you an artist? Ito na yung mga ano natin.
Why am I an artist?
Big words, big questions.
Poetic. Requires a poetic answer. Poetic response. I guess this is related to that question, like when did you decide to become an artist? Like why and when? Parang I would usually respond to that na parang I was one of those kids who discovered drawing as my form of play. Like when kids play sports or dance or sing, I was one of those kids that found the pencil and just decided to draw and never stopped. So there was no one point where I decided, I want to be a visual artist. I was just one of those kids that never stopped playing, and my form of play was like imitating what I saw via drawing or clay.
Rendering.
So very inherent, intuitive na, at tuloy-tuloy na. So the why, I guess that sort of answers the why. Syempre, as you grow older and your practice evolves and deepens, siguro mas marami ng why na nagko-compound with your initial impulse to just create, no?
Yeah.
Like your concerns and issues as a citizen of this world. Yeah. So so dumadami yung whys.
And yeah, we try our best to answer them, or if there are questions na hindi talaga natin masasagot, we work around these questions. And I go to another question. Makasegue lang ako. Another question, what was the hardest part in building the concepts or forms or a whole process of making an installation art as a particular form, yung installation natin? Ano yung pinakamahirap? Is it, hustling for materials or talking to people, or planning?
Medyo siguro I'm a sucker for punishment kasi why the heck would I go into this kind of work na alam kong mas mahirap, mas marami kung kailangan ko usapin, mas marami kang kailangan na materyales, bilad ka sa araw. Pero I guess I had like a very adventurous spirit as a kid. I was trying to build tree houses when I was young. So I guess I have the energy for it. Um, pero yun, interesting question kasi nga, I've learned to become a good project manager. I've learned from being a shy kid from Jensen, no, na conservative Catholic, you're not really taught to be opinionated or to be vocal about stuff like, ano lang kayo, dyan, upo lang kayo, quiet. Ganyan, di ba? I've had to learn this to be able to communicate my ideas to people in order for them to believe in the work and to support it. So, importante yun. But yun nga, but also like, ang dami mong skills na kailangan matutunan on top of like being a good communicator. Yan, like sourcing materials, managing money, real world, mga adulting talaga. Managing different personalities na katrabaho mo, learning to speak many different kinds of languages, no? Depende sa kausap ko, dapat nakaka-relate ka. Siyempre, you have to deal with like your clients to like your yung mga katrabaho kong welder, di ba? So talagang yun, medyo which I'm very grateful for kasi I mean, if you're able to like hold different perspectives within you, parang that's the best thing.
Yeah, and it gives you, and I think it gives you a sense of humility that when you speak to people, regardless, this is actually not even beyond art, no, na if we are able to communicate clearly, we can really achieve and do something collaboratively. So I think it is also a hard, artwork. Again, artwork is hard. So it takes a lot of,
Exactly.
brain cells. It takes a lot of heart, and it takes a lot of guts to accomplish an art piece, or kasi sa iyo installation art mo, you need a lot of people to build it. You need guilders essentially
Right.
in creating your pieces.
Yeah.
And it takes
And
a lot of
that's
consent.
that's what parang what I learned from doing theater productions. Kasi you're not the artist. You're like part of the entire team, creative team. Or like in a film set. No, parang doon natatemper yung artist ego. But also, yun nga, but it's not for everybody kasi like, I know some artists na talagang, they just really want to like focus on one thing inside their room, inside their studio. And sure, that's fine. Yeah, I guess I'm just grateful that I have the energy to, I'm very curious, no, to the point that I want to constantly learn from people, from new experiences.
Okay. Thanks, Leeroy again. Maybe last question. Sky, please confirm if this is our last question, but this is a quite long text. It seems like your current body of work concerns itself with the intrusion of organic nature or resemblance of nature into the human constructed world, making the ordinary into something alien by displacing it from its original human use or context. Just curious, what is your view of nature?
I'm constantly influenced by nature. I mean, how can you not be? Because we ourselves are part of nature. Our bodies are part of nature. So, and my vision of this Filipino sci-fi emulates nature, no? Like natural principles. Like we're trying to create an alternative to like the spaceships that we built, like the one in La Union, inspired by the goddess principle of regeneration and transformation and growth, parang which is an alternative to yung mga rocket ships ng mga billionaires trying to colonize another planet. Diba?
Yeah.
Ganyan.
I think embedded kasi the question niya is yung yung natural artificial schism, yung created artificially and created naturally, but as you say, artists are human beings who are actually natural, or I mean they're living. So
yeah.
ayun yung kanyang yun yung kanyang
synthetic.
tanong. Oo, yung synthetic kasi when you create your flowing lines, our
Yeah.
assumption of flowing lines is na nature siya. But then it's
Yes,
made
yes.
out of plastic, and that's yun nga yung nilalaro
Yeah.
mo 'di ba? Artistically. How do you make
Well, who
something?
knows?
Yeah.
In the future, plastic bio na tayo. Like we're ingesting
Yeah.
plastic as we speak, di ba? So, wala. The art is just reflecting what's actually happening now. We're consuming
Mm.
plastic and we don't know it. Yeah. So that's
And
yung scary part.
okay, another question. I think we're extending our time. Levita Passion, she says that she's in an educational setting, or she's an educator perhaps, or part of the teaching sector. Tips on how to use arts to advertise or encourage clients to come and visit the museum and art rooms from an artist.
Again, sorry.
Yes. What are your tips on how to use arts to
Mm-mm.
encourage clients to come and visit the museum or the art rooms?
Mm. Huh. In the museum or the art, what?
Art rooms or art
Art
galleries?
rooms.
Oo.
Ah. Huh.
So medyo ako naman, I'm looking at this, meron kang art
Mm-hmm.
object pero you
Mm-hmm.
need collateral to
Yeah.
to support the art object, but I think the art object
Mm-hmm.
itself should invite the viewers immediately. If it's
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
interesting enough, it is contextual
Yeah.
enough to their lives.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry if I'm if I'm
Oh no,
responding.
please.
Pero
Kasi
ikaw kung
baka mas aware ka yata sa how that works eh. Ako, I agree. Like the work has to be endearing enough, engaging enough. Be this a work outside of the museum or inside, no? Parang it's like with my work, like I don't necessarily do a lot of works now inside galleries. Pero you really have to consider what people what engages people, how to draw them in. I understand this through knowing that Filipinos relate to craft, no? So like so I make it a point that there's like a level of craft to my work. Like even if they don't understand what it is or what the thing is or if it's art, pero they cannot deny that there was like craft involved in the making of this thing, no? And also the forms are intentional, that they're kind of alien, no? Like we want like an occasion, like these works are an occasion for like a new experience for form or whatever, no? Yun.
And
Kaya medyo
yung unsettling of the idea, yun nga kailangan mo silang i-convince na unsettled sila or there's a question in order for them to come. So
yeah, exactly.
From the project management side naman, I think kung gusto mo ma-engage yung client or audience or your community, ask them what they want to see. I think that's the first thing that you need to do if your art gallery is starting up. Parang what do you want to do as an artist or as an arts professional? Then combine it with what your immediate community tells you that they need. Then the middle ground is your activation space, your creation space. Doon yung agreement din yun. So
it requires a lot of these conversations.
Yeah.
And
so,
it's constantly evolving then.
Yeah.
It's a process.
May ibang conversations nawawala. I mean, it depends on how you maintain that flow of of ideas between you and that person or
Yeah.
organization. Okay, last question. I think, do you have something in your head, an idea that you have been cooking for a long time, but just could not bring it into reality because it's too political or
Mm.
it's too taboo to be
Mm.
even to think about, I mean, to be taboo, so not to be shown in public. And he asked or she asked, what is it?
Well,
If you want, well, if it's a secret, then wag mo na sabihin.
oo
But if
nga.
you want to share.
Surprise na lang, magulat na lang kayo, joke. Um, well, not necessarily just taboo, but also because it's logistically, at this point in my life, hindi pa kayang gawin. No? Or like, kung hindi man in terms of production, but also like my emotional readiness for such works. No? That involves, siguro, I don't know, my works that involve my own body or like, performance-based or like, or parang large-scale transformative installation projects that would define communities, mga ganon. Marami eh. Kasi there are many aspects to the work that I do, pero they're all somehow interconnected nga. Related. Yeah. Yun, I mean, I'm still, we're all in a state of unraveling and learning and evolving about ourselves. So who knows, like what actually ano pa, who knows, baka magbago pa yan.
But what I think the person is asking is meron kang ang consciousness that there is that germination or development of that idea inside inside you already. Okay. So I think Angelo, hintayin na lang natin what he
I mean, I've started it already, diba? Like I'm before, like when I was young, watching these sci-fi films, syempre I wanted to externalize into reality mga napapanood ko, no? So and now I'm actually slowly, bit by bit, able to do it. Like I'm able to build like a spaceship colony thing by the shore sa ano yun. So what was just like something that I thought of as a young kid in Jensen, ngayon nagagawa. I'm actually building spaceships now and moving towards turning these into practical spaces, into inhabitable functional spaces that people can use. So like the colony installation in Ateneo, like how do I like move away from just like creating, like a seductive sculptural form to something that is actually practical and can be used. Like in the case of the installation in Ateneo, like I work with a farmer, like so that we can actually grow food in that space, which was I know informed by our experiences nung pandemic when we were like growing our own food and helping out in community pantries. So why can't these installation art projects have other practical functions, no? Other than just looking pretty. Yeah.
Okay, Leeroy. So I think we need to wrap up. We thank all of our audience for coming, and Japan Foundation Manila, I think they're asking for address where they could actually send further questions to Leeroy after this talk. Before we end the seminar, we'd like to request our viewers to help the Japan Foundation Manila improve their programs and services by filling out the questionnaire that we prepared. And with that, on behalf of the Japan Foundation Manila team, Sky, Abe-san, and Yumi-san, and our other colleagues at the Japan Foundation Manila, I would like to thank you all for spending your Saturday afternoon with us, and most especially to you, Leroy, who you generously shared your knowledge and experiences with us. Maraming salamat po. Arigato gozaimashita.
Maraming
And
salamat.
Yes, see you again at the next JCAP Colloquium of the Japan Foundation Manila. Maraming salamat po. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you, Leroy.
Salamat. Thank you,
Thank you,
Randall.
Leroy. God
Thank
bless.
you.
Thank you, Tito.
Bye po.
Bye.